Well, we'll move on to closing remarks. Thanks.
Well, Gary, in closing, I'd like to reiterate our thanks to the Women's Foundation for all the work of you and the staff here and everyone who's helped make this happen. A lot of work in making this type of event come together. Also, thanks to all the speakers who came and took a lot of their time to actually speak. I guess I walk away from this with the idea in my mind that we're all facing some interesting opportunities, regardless of whether you're getting fifth gen or whatever. We will be operating in coalitions in the future. That's the reality of it. As we all start to face these challenges of understanding what the transformation offers, whether it's a legacy fleet or those of us who are getting into the fifth gen area, I think it behoves us to somehow find a way of communicating, sharing ideas of how we can make those future coalition forces work together. That's not something that is going to be delivered by any single company or single fleet, but I think as the users of these capabilities, it's incumbent upon us to have discussions like we're trying to initiate here of, if we end up in a future coalition, can we have at least thought for quite a while how we would work together? Like, for example, if we turn up in the same location with Danish forces, let's have a bit of a think how that might work, but it's not just two forces, it's multiple. So I certainly get the conclusion we're all facing the same sort of question, we don't have the answers. But as hopefully you could see in my presentation on Jericho, we're very open about the fact that we don't have answers. But we want to explore those questions over the next year or two. The other thing I'm very keen to form is the right networks at the right level. As I said, we're looking at that 0605 level. Senior officers do visits between forces. They generally tend to be very structured, very full schedules and agendas. When we have our various interoperability meetings that I've been to over the years, they tend to be fairly structured. But to try and set up an ongoing dialogue at that level, in my mind, which is the 060, particular 06 level, if we can find a way of having an ongoing dialogue across allied forces and just share information, share thinking, then I think we're going to be a lot better off in trying to address that. As we then also look to partnering with industry, I think some shared information between the forces on how we do it is important. Not one single company by themselves is going to help us address this. It has to be a consortium because we're dealing with multiple sources of capabilities from multiple countries. So hopefully over time we can try and build these sort of networks, both at the think tank level and directly between the forces, at an appropriate level where people have the time to think. And certainly the retired guys like us in the think tanks have a bit of time to think, not calling a retired game yet. But also those folks in the services who've got this as a dedicated job at the time. And also I was very interested to see what, for example, the EAG's doing. And having had the opportunity to visit the other day, something I hadn't heard of before, but what you guys are doing is really interesting. And I think we will try and encourage, whilst not a member of it, certainly trying to encourage the Australians to link in, exchange information. You're trying to answer some difficult questions. And I think being a part of that is the best way to solve it. So once again, Gary, thank you very much. We appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. And of course, building partnerships is what this is all about, not just for the Center for Military Studies or for the Danish Air Force, but across all allies and partners within Europe. And essentially what I wanted to do, and I'm going to skip through an awful lot of this because frankly, as Chip put up there earlier, I'm old. I wanted to walk on through and say essentially, well, political leaders are calling upon air power more and more because it has all the characteristics that we expanded upon throughout the day. And because of that, we have increased situational awareness about what's happening in the world, not just globally, the state of effect, which lots of people talked about 25 years ago, but granular information about everything that comes from where things are located, how we can hit them, whether or not we can actually see them in all types of weather, and persistent surveillance. But after listening to Chip earlier, I know I'm old, I'm late, and, well, if we were in a fight, I would lose. Because it's a very old graphic, and it tells me that my own knowledge has degraded significantly from what I thought it was about 6 or 7 years ago at the Air War College when I was sitting in on all the warfighting courses. But I think that last bit with regard to high bandwidth is extremely important, just because. All sorts of stuff with regard to how effective air power is. I'm just going to flash on through this quickly. A key point, though, made by the the Chief of Staff of the Air Force 2 days ago was that air power is joint combat power. And at least for the United States, it's been 62 years since a soldier or Marine has been killed by enemy air. And that's very important because anywhere you go, you want to have that coverage so you can actually do things on the ground. So this isn't just about air power, it's about joint combat power. And that's what we're really talking about today. And I think that helps change the complexion of the discussion significantly. So it's not looking at a replacement aircraft, it's about a combat capability that one takes with you when you go abroad to slay dragons, or if you stay at home when the dragons come to you. You've all noticed, I'm sure, the Game of Thrones billboards around town nowadays. And just a little bit, of course, I was going to ask actually Robin and Ed about whether or not it's the platform that's important. You know, about 10 years ago, 15 years ago, people were talking about the platforms being unimportant. Platforms were simply bomb trucks. You could put a B-52, you could strap a whole lot of precision munitions on them and do all sorts of things. And you really didn't need stealth, you really didn't need agility, you really didn't need speed. You could do without a long-range bomber, for example, or at least a new one. And of course, the key thing about that was weapons, weapons, weapons. Weapons are becoming far more accurate, far more discriminating, and that depends upon, again, situational awareness of what we're trying to do in theater. So you can actually find what you would like to hit, make sure it's the right thing, hit it precisely, and not hit something else. For example, the Chinese embassy. And finally, I just wanted to make the point that P.P. Olson is leading this nice working group at NATO with regard to munitions. So a little bit of local flavor here with regard to the focus on munitions. Last week I was in Breda giving a speech, keynote speech, lecture at the military academy. And one of the things that struck me about that was that the Dutch, and again unfortunately they've all left, they all got into a cab I was arranging a little while ago, were responsible for the first revolution in military affairs. The first doctrine manual on weapons handling was put together by Maurice of Nassau in 1585. And the printing press, an ability to convey information and knowledge in a standardized fashion, revolutionized combat on the European continent. And in fact, the military academy at Breda is, of course, the descendant of the school that Maurice had founded, and so I use this as the opening vector into my lecture for the importance of training and educating officers in the use of force. And the key thing about this, particularly for cadets, was that standardized tactics in the drill which was enabled by actually having a doctrine manual and the ability to communicate that information in an efficient and effective manner, freed commanders to think. No longer did they have to run around the battlefield enforcing discipline among their infantrymen, among their pikemen. They could actually sit back and think about what was happening on the battlefield. And by doing so, as they sat back and thought about this, they created all sorts of innovations. The Colo Machiavelli. By the way, we're in this wonderful room. We have the swords, we have the crossbow, we have the muskets in the back. That technology, that shift in munitions, if you will, and shooter abilities was occurring at this time. Niccolo Machiavelli was writing at the same time in the discourses. Machiavelli disliked those weapons hanging on the wall. He thought that if you gave a musket, which was a very complicated piece of equipment to infantrymen at the time, in fact, I mean, this doctrine manual has a 37-step process for loading and discharging a musket. That, commoners, if you will, which would now have the ability to kill elites, nobles, knights, they were able to learn that pretty quickly. But Machiavelli did not like that innovation, not because he was a noble and, of course, was applying for a new job with the families there, but because it created a situation on the battlefield of indiscipline or lack of discipline among people who weren't well trained in a systematic manner to utilize this new technology. So, although they had the best munitions and gun makers in Milan, he thought that at most 5% of the force ought to be equipped with this high-tech weapon because it simply changed the nature of the battlefield in a way that was not controllable. The Dutch, however, thought about battlefield innovation. And they changed their operational concepts by thinking about, they didn't have the best guns, but they were able to generate enough of them and purchase enough of them. And so they were able to take the basic size of an infantry unit and drop it from 3,000 men to 135. And despite that tremendous decrease in personnel, putting people through the drill with discipline and having officers enforcing silence on the battlefield so they could assess what was happening and be able to direct their men to the appropriate place at the appropriate time to concentrate fires, they were able to get these guys to utilize their firearms effectively, change the equipment distribution among that particular type of unit. So you had officers, pages, and pikemen, in addition to those who were holding muskets and firearms, made those into modular subunits that could be transferred between unit to unit because they're all standardized according to the doctrine manual. And those 135 guys had overwhelming firepower, superiority over units. What's that? My public math is always bad. Much larger than they are. And my basic point here is that if I was to try to put a historical theme on top of what we've been talking about today, is we're seeing something similar. We've been seeing something similar in the development of technology over the past 15 or 20 years. The ability to think about how to use the torrent of information that is coming in, that is overwhelming to commanders, is much like the indisciplined or ill-disciplined battlefield of the past. And how do we sit back and think about operational concepts and how we readjust and reconfigure our forces to utilize them effectively on the battlefield will enable us to perhaps become either a Maurice, who utilize these types of forces for defensive purposes, or, well, we have no Swedes here, but, or Gustavus Adolphus, who was able to take that particular innovation and change it into an offensive weapon and basically run around the periphery of the Baltic. And quite successfully. And in fact, it's not necessarily Maurice who gets credited with the first RMA, but Gustavus Adolphus, if you go back through that historical literature. And so the question here, and I know it's not I know it's certainly not me, because I'm old and slow and far behind the times. But what if Maurice or Gustavus Adolphus had air power? That's a different way of framing the question that we had today, I think. And the more we think about this, we can actually help the guys who are actually flying these aircraft and figuring out what they can do with them. And we can listen to them as well. And in that interaction, perhaps bring about, or at least cement in, a further revolution in military affairs. This is one of the things that we at the Center for Military Studies at the University of Copenhagen try to do, in addition to providing a platform for thinking about defense policies that are currently facing the government and the MOD and the Danish Armed Forces today. For example, fighter recapitalization, and perhaps the debates that we can have about the specifics of that particular decision. And I hope that we all leave here today a little bit smarter, a little bit wiser, a little bit better informed about what air power can do, and perhaps walk away with better understandings of the potential that partnerships and cooperation can bring to small and medium air forces as we go forward. And with that, just a quick few things on my takeaways. I like building my slides. But partnerships are the key to enabling small and medium air forces to squeeze out more combat power, more joint combat power for less money, because everyone's being asked to do more with less, and being smarter is the way you can do that. And with that, thank you very much. We have a nice reception going on just across the parade grounds here, and I'm sure there are lots of signs, and I hope to see you there where we can conduct all sorts of informal business for the next hour and 45 minutes or thereabouts until the food runs out. Thank you.